Before we begin, we'd like to honor the indigenous ancestors of this land.
The land upon which we stand today is the traditional territory of so many First Nations peoples. And this morning we offer tobacco to elders from those communities and ask their permission that we might speak today.
My name is Valarie Kaur of the Revolutionary Love Project.
And my name is Victor Kazanjian of URI, the United Religions Initiative.
And right now I am 8 months pregnant. And so I could not travel to be with you all today, which is why I'm so grateful that Victor can be here and there with you. Victor has been a thought leader, a thought partner in the movement that we are building to ground our lives and our social justice movements in the ethic of revolutionary love. He has also been a midwife to me as I have been trying to birth these ideas in the world. So the fact that he is here with me now and there with you to continue the conversation brings me so much joy. He'll be there with you right after I deliver my address.
Thank you, Valarie.
Thank you. Vaheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Vaheguru Ji Ki Fateh. The beloved community belongs to divine oneness, and so does all that it achieves. Sisters, brothers, and siblings of the world, how are you breathing today? Because right now, as an American, as a Sikh, as a woman of color, and as a pregnant woman, I am having a hard time breathing. I'm having a hard time breathing each morning when I wake to a country where a white nationalist movement has captured large segments of our population and the presidency of the United States. When we must wake each day to face new policies that rip children from their parents at the border, that ban immigrants and refugees from stepping onto U.S. soil because they are Muslim, policies that roll back voting rights and women's rights and health care and the open internet, policies that do nothing to stop the rising seas and coming storms that threaten all of humanity. I am having a hard time breathing in the face of the latest hate crime against my community, against families like mine, against children who look like mine. Hate crimes that are fueled by a president and lawmakers whose cruelty towards women and people of color is only matched by daily assaults on journalism, the rule of law, and truth itself, all while the lawmakers of that party stand silent. I am having a hard time breathing when even the voices of millions of women rising up, telling survival stories, calling for justice, cannot stop these same lawmakers from handing an alleged abuser a lifetime appointment to the Supreme Court. A decision that will make the labor for justice for women, for poor people, and people of color in America so much harder, so much longer, and so much more painful, not for the next few years, but for decades to come. I had wanted my daughter to inherit a nation where women are believed. Yes, I am having a hard time breathing. Because what is happening in the United States right now is part of a global trend as we see the rise of far right-wing movements around the world threatening democracy, women's rights, and human rights for all of us. The last time I was having this much trouble breathing was when I was in labor with my first child. I remember my mother whispered in my ear, "You are brave, you are brave," reciting a Sikh prayer of Chardikala, ever-rising spirits, even in darkness, even in the pain of labor. And so every day in the Sikh spirit of Chardikala, I find myself asking the same question. What if? What if this darkness in the world is not the darkness of the tomb? What if it is the darkness of the womb? What if our America is not dead, but a nation still waiting to be born? What if a new world is waiting to be born? What if all of our ancestors who pushed through the fire before us, who survived genocide and slavery, occupation and sexual violence, what if they are standing behind us right now, whispering in our ear, "You are brave, you are brave"? What if this is our time of great transition? The midwife, The midwife tells us to breathe and then to push. And so I take a breath, and take a breath with me. And when I breathe, I remember that birth is painful. Birth is only possible with pain and with love. Our greatest social justice leaders, from Gandhi to King to Mandela, they built entire nonviolent movements rooted in the ethic of love. I believe it is time to reclaim love as a public ethic in our lives and in our movements, but we cannot do it the same way. It is time to reclaim love through a feminist lens. And when we see love through a feminist lens, love is more than a feeling. Love is a form of sweet labor, fierce, bloody, imperfect, life-giving. It is a human birthright, a kind of labor that all of us are capable of. I believe that revolutionary love is the call of our times. The choice to enter into labor for others, for our opponents, and for ourselves. I have had the honor of working with communities laboring together in the fire, and I want to share with you what I've learned from them, these 3 practices for how to love others, our opponents, and ourselves. Number 1, how do we practice loving others? I call this practice see no stranger. The words of Guru Nanak, the founder of the Sikh faith. He taught us that we can train our eye to see no stranger when we look upon the faces of others with wonder and think to ourselves, sister, brother, sibling, you are a part of me I do not yet know. I choose to wonder about you. I choose to hear your stories and grieve with you and fight with you when you are in harm's way. This is not the golden rule. This is an evolution of the golden rule. Love others as you would have them love you. This is love others as they would have you love them. It requires an orientation of humility and wonder. And so I ask you, whose stories have you not yet heard? Who have you not yet grieved with? What new coalitions are waiting to be built? In what brave new ways does love call you to labor for one another? Because when we listen closely to each other, we realize that love requires more than prayer. Love requires showing up for others at vigils and the marches and at the polls. Love requires rising up together in the thousands, in the millions, marching in the streets, flooding halls of power. I have seen you do this here in the United States. I have seen you standing your ground at Standing Rock, occupying Wall Street, making Black Lives Matter, rising up to declare Me Too and Time's Up, starting entire movements in the wake of bloodshed to say never again. And I have seen you behind closed doors, in houses of worship and prayer circles, where you are grieving together, you are organizing together, you are raging together, you are caring for one another. I have never witnessed solidarity this deep in my lifetime before, and each time I see glimpses of a nation, of a world that is longing to be born. A nation that has never been and yet still must be. A world that has never been and still must be. Multiracial, multicultural, multi-faith, and rooted in a revolutionary love. This brings me to number 2. How do we love even our opponents? How do we labor for them too? I call this practice tend the wound. Our opponents, the terrorists, the fanatic, the demagogue in office, they're not monsters, but people who themselves are wounded, who themselves feel threatened, who don't know what else to do with their insecurity but to hurt us, to pull the trigger or cast the vote or pass the policy aimed at us. But if some of us begin to wonder about them, listen even to their stories, we learn that participation in oppression comes at a cost. It cuts them off from their own capacity to love. We begin to see that our opponents are radicalized by cultures and institutions that we ourselves can change. Loving our opponents is therefore not just moral. It is pragmatic. It is strategic. It focuses us not just on removing bad actors from power, but on remaking those institutions of power. This is why I believe it is time to shift the frame of our movements in America and around the globe from resistance to rebirth. Resistance is required for survival, but resistance alone points us to what we are fighting against, not what we are fighting for. Resistance alone marshals the energies of revenge. Rebirth marshals the energies of love. Our goal is more than to stop the next crisis or win the next election. Our goal is to birth a more just world for all of us. And so I ask you, what does it mean for you to labor even for your opponents, to remake the world for all of us? And if this question is too painful to consider, then you must let others do that labor right now. That's why we are a movement. We each have a role, and those who are in harm's way right now must tend to our own safety. And that brings me to number 3. How do we love ourselves? I call this practice breathe and push. Our greatest social justice leaders, from Gandhi to King, they taught us a lot about loving others and our opponents, but not a lot about loving ourselves. You see, this is a feminist intervention. For too long have women and women of color been told to suppress our rage, suppress our grief, and our own wellness in the name of love and forgiveness, but our suffering is not service. Our safety is paramount. We need to honor our rage and our grief and breathe through the fire of our emotions. We need to love our flesh, even inside the labor, and make our own flourishing matter. The midwife, she tells us to breathe and to push when we are pushing into the fires of our bodies or in the fires of the world. We cannot breathe alone. We need to breathe together. So I ask you, how are you breathing today? How are you breathing each day? Who are you breathing with? Are you breathing with the ones you love, with music and meditation and movement and prayer? Are you breathing with the earth, sea, and sky? Are you breathing to summon the ancestors at your back? Are you breathing to create joy in your life? Can you breathe in order to remember all that is beautiful and good and worth fighting for? We need to be breathing, and this brings me to you, sisters and brothers and siblings of the world. You are the faith leaders and indigenous healers. You are the counselors and the artists and the activists. You are the educators and organizers, and that means you are the midwives in this time of great transition, tasked with birthing a new future for all of us. Many of you have at hand thousands of years of stories and scriptures and songs and poetry to help people labor for justice with and through love. Together, I believe we can practice how to see no stranger, how to tend the wound, and how to breathe and push. We need you. For the labor for justice has gone on for centuries before us and will go on after us. But if we return to the labor together now, if we continue this labor in revolutionary love, I believe we can begin to deliver the world we dream for all of our children yet to come. Thank you so much. Vaheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Vaheguru Ji Ki Fateh.
What if this darkness in our world is not the darkness of the tomb, but the darkness of the womb? What if a new world is waiting to be born? Dear sisters and brothers, tonight we receive this wisdom, these teachings from our sixth sister, Valarie Kaur, and we listen and take in her powerful words in the midst of this extraordinary gathering of humanity, and also in the midst of an extraordinarily complicated and dangerous time in world history as cycles of violence and poverty deepen, despotic regimes strengthen, and the earth cries out in agony. Valarie invites us not into the paralysis of the pit of despair, but into a fierce and bloody labor of birthing a new world, a world in which revolutionary love is our central ethic. Like prophets before her, Valarie stands in the midst of the pain of the world, eyes and heart wide open, taking in that pain, the pain of others, the pain of her community, the pain of her country, the pain of the planet, pain she feels in her body and soul, and with the words of her mother whispering in her ear, you are brave, giving her courage. She breathes and pushes through the pain, bringing to new life a new hope, birthing a new movement for us, a movement which expresses itself through love in action, revolutionary love, the choice to enter into labor for others, for our opponents, and ourselves. It is breathtaking. And in our humanness and our breathlessness, our minds and bodies push back in the face of the challenges before us. In the face of Valarie's call to action, there are perhaps voices arising in us that shout, but what about the pain and the suffering and the violence? How is this possible to counter all this violence, to talk about love, to birth new consciousness? It can't be done. It's too hard, too much to bear. I can't breathe. I find it hard to breathe. And then, like her mother before her, Valarie whispers in our ears, breathe, dear friends, you are enough. You are brave. You can do this. You can push through the fear, the isolation, the pain. Do not resist the forces of labor. Feel the forces of love around you and within you. And then, say it with me, breathe and push. Breathe and push. This is what we're called to do in the midst of this time of great transition. Not just resist the forces of the shadows, but rebirth the reality that revolutionary love reestablishes us as one family, one human family. Valarie is so right. The sacred writings of all traditions, the teachings of poets and prophets all speak to this. God created humanity in God's image. From one ancestor, God made all the nations to inhabit the whole earth. All of us are sheltered beneath the overshadowing dome of heavens, each part of the whole hoop of the world, where all live together like one being. These are visions of revolutionary love. A revolutionary love which expresses itself in radical inclusion, the embracing of the diversity of all humanity, of all living things as essential, sacred, and interdependent. This is the power of love and the promise of inclusion that gathers us here this week. As a child, I grew up as one among many. It was not unusual for me, when at my grandparents' dinner table, to be surrounded by people of a wide variety of beliefs. Their friends typically included Christians and Jews, Muslims and Hindus, Buddhists and humanists, indigenous peoples from around the world. This was my world. This was my normal. I was one among many. I learned that my Christian path was one among many, and that being one among many was a beautiful thing, one of the many diverse beings that God or the Great Spirit or the life force created, different nations and tribes. We were created united in mind and heart. We were created bound together in our common humanity to each other, to all living beings, and to our Mother Earth. But as I grew up, I began to realize that many other people did not share my one among many experience, at least not in a positive way. They did not see themselves as part of the nations and tribes all created, did not feel that connection or commitment to the well-being of all humanity. Instead, I heard people talk about those different from themselves as other, as foreign, as unbelievers, as a threat, as the enemy. And I heard people making claims of exclusive ownership of the truth, claims that diminished and delegitimized the experience and beliefs of others. This made me sad as a child. It makes me sad now. There is no place for exclusivism in religion or in politics or in our world. It has arguably been the single greatest source of suffering throughout history. Religious exclusivism, the belief that my truth is the only truth, violates the core spiritual tenets of all beliefs.
The claim of exclusive knowledge of the truth is, in a religious sense, idolatry, in a political sense, extremism, and in a psychological sense, narcissism. In all these cases, exclusivism leads to the dehumanization and exclusion, not to love and inclusion. Valarie has offered us practices for embodying revolutionary love, to love others by seeing no stranger, to love our opponents by tending the wounds, to love ourselves by breathing and pushing. The practice of radical inclusion requires the practice of radical humility. Understanding each of our own perspectives as formed by our unique experience of the world, we need to hear and understand the experience of others in order to gain a more complete understanding of this world. Human diversity can be such a beautiful thing, but when viewed through an isolated, exclusivist, or fear-based lens, this can feed the poisons of racism, sexism, homophobia, xenophobia, anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, and all other fear-based diseases that infect our society. We see this all around us. Purveyors of fear, spreading the nonsense of a clash of civilizations or the heresy of the superiority of one race, gender, or religion over another. Words that have consequences in violent action, including around the world. Just this past week, the killings at the Tree of Life Synagogue in Pittsburgh, near a church in Kentucky, at a mosque in Somalia, at a shrine in Iraq, in villages in Nigeria, and so many other places. Acts of violence born of prejudice, the direct result of dehumanizing rhetoric and the division that it creates. We weep, we grieve for the loss of life and suffering, and then we go back to work, meeting that hate, that violence with revolutionary love and with radical inclusion. In my work in the United Religions Initiative, I see people of all beliefs refusing to be divided, reaching across lines of difference, engaging in dialogue, learning from one another, celebrating diversity, and working side by side to engage the challenges faced by their communities and the world, practicing revolutionary love and radical inclusion. I hear and witness every day good news stories about millions of people like you who are spread out across the world, dedicated to promoting daily interfaith cooperation, ending religiously motivated violence, and creating cultures of peace, justice, and healing for the earth and all living beings. In answering Valarie's call, we must become midwives of a new consciousness, a new world, inspired by the ethic of revolutionary love, practicing radical inclusion, rooted in radical humility, informed by the teachings of our sacred traditions, and also informed by the wisdom of new voices, young voices like Rachel's, allowing young people to be our teachers. We must welcome young people as our leaders, not for the future, but right now. In doing this, we become midwives of the movement, bringing our skills to the process of helping others birth the life and love that is within them, rebirthing the sacredness and interwovenness of all life. Dear friends, we have a magnificent and formidable journey ahead of us. Valarie has challenged us to rebirth our lives and our world, and through the practice of revolutionary love. Inspired by her vision, I challenge you to rebirth our religious and spiritual movements in ways that reject exclusivism and embrace the unique beauty and truth that lies at the heart of all traditions. In this way, we learn to live our lives as one among many, freeing our own traditions from the idolatrous bonds of exclusivism which have held them captive for too long. And freeing our world from the abuses of power and privilege under which so many have suffered and continue to suffer, thereby replacing the fear-based practices of patriarchy with revolutionary love and radical inclusion. As I look out at you, I am aware that I am one among many, and that being one among many is a beautiful thing. As I hear you speak, as I look into your eyes, I see no stranger, but rather I see God in you. I feel God's presence in you, not just a partial reflection of my Christian God, but a wholeness that lies beyond my experience and connects us one to the other. As I hear Valarie's call and am inspired by the work of all those people in the United Religions Initiative, in revolutionary love movements inspired by you, I know that my task, our task on this planet at this time, is to help our communities, our country, and this world to discover that we are one among many. But not just one among many, that out of many we can become one. Out of many we can become one. My deepest thanks for Valarie, for her leadership in this movement, and thanks to you for the courage of your commitment to bring peace each day into your lives and into this world. Peace, Shanti, Shalom, Salam, Sat Nam, Watai Kiwin. May peace be with you now and always.